All right, it's Thursday. It's almost the end of the week here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We move through the week, putting out these Morning Pitt videos every day of the week, Monday through Friday, to give you something to talk about, get a little conversation going to start your day. You get your morning shower, you get your morning shave, and you get your morning pit. Maybe you listen to it while you're doing those things, or maybe you catch up on it afterward. Either way, we always ask you to do the same thing. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then head over to the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. I was going back and forth on what to talk about today. I was checking out the message board, see what people were talking about. And obviously, still a lot of talk about conference realignment in the ACC and Pitt's future. We talked about that on yesterday's Morning Pitt, and there's not really anything new, at least for me to say, not anything new I'm interested in saying or inclined to say. So we're going to leave that topic behind and move forward to something a little bit different, a little bit off the beaten path, or just a different topic that I was actually researching for the 3-2-1 column tomorrow. So you'll read more of this. You'll kind of see it in writing tomorrow. But I was looking back, I was thinking about Servassier Dennis, right? Being drafted in the 5th round and, having a good chance at a good pro career. Obviously being a very good player at Pitt, having a great career over his time at Pitt since joining the Panthers in 2019. And I was thinking about how he was a 2-star prospect and some of the reactions to his commitment way back when. And it was funny because someone brought up the thread on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. And I don't always advise doing this, going back and finding old threads. I mean, the internet was not made for us to be held accountable for the things we say, right? But it's funny sometimes because you read some of the reactions. And it was, yay, no star. He should have committed to Syracuse. They can take no stars. I'd say this is an example of Pitt's recruiting not being good enough. Wow, this is very concerning. Another underwhelming prospect. I miss the good old days when we complained about taking 3 stars that had MAC offers. And I don't bring it up to kind of make fun of the people who said those things. I understand. I mean, Servassier Dennis had no offers, less than no offers. He was committed to Air Force. He signed with Air Force. He backed off of that and ultimately committed to Pitt over offers from Dartmouth, Elon, Fordham, Holy Cross, Lafayette, Lehigh, UMass, Rhode Island, Richmond, and Western Michigan. So not exactly the company you want to be in there when you're trying to get a player. And so I understand the fan reaction to that. And he's a 2-star prospect, not very exciting for anyone. And obviously goes on to have a great career. So, but this is not... Today's episode of the Morning Pit is not about, telling you should always trust the coaches and they'll find 2-stars who can become great players. It's more of just using the Servassier Dennis situation and Servassier Dennis's history as a way to set up a different kind of conversation, because I started looking up 2-star prospects that have signed at Pitt. And it's an interesting list. All right, and now we're going back to the start of the Rivals.com database, which was the recruiting class of 2002. So, before that, I don't know. And obviously you get some guys who, who knows what their ranking would have been if better valuation existed or if they were coming out these days or whatever. But I went through, and I think there were 112 2-star or no-star recruits that Pitt has signed since 2002. So that's roughly, 24 recruiting classes or so. So... 112 kids spread over 24 recruiting classes. What's the math on that? Where's my calculator? I should have done this math. 112 divided by 24, 4.7 or so. And I think you get a heavier, on average, 4.7 2-stars per recruiting class. And I think on average, that's on average. You get some classes that have a few more and some classes that have a few less. And I only use this as sort of a jumping off point for what I think is a pretty interesting conversation and an interesting breakdown of those 2-star guys and how you could build a full 11-on-11 game just with 2-star prospects that Pitt has gotten. And there's actually some positions where I don't know who you would choose. It's actually really interesting. So let's just run that down. So today, that's what today's episode is going to be. 11-on-11, offense versus defense, all 2-star recruits. Okay, now don't tune out. You're probably thinking to yourself, oh my God, what are you talking about? This isn't interesting. I think you'll find it interesting once I start running down these names. All right, quarterback, I'm going with Luke Getsy. Ben DiNucci would be the other option of a 2-star or 0-star quarterback recruit that they signed. DiNucci had, I think he won a couple games at Pitt. Luke Getsy obviously transferred, but then had a pretty good career. Where did he go? Akron? Something like that. I think you'd probably go with Getsy as your quarterback. Running back, you have 2 stars in Rashad Jennings and Isaac Bennett. Dion Lewis was not a 2-star recruit. I'm sorry to ruin this common storyline about Dion Lewis and Aaron Donald, but they won't be mentioned here today because they were not 2-star recruits. But Rashad Jennings and Isaac Bennett were. Rashad Jennings was at Pitt for 1 year, Dave Wanstead's first season, 2005, and he transferred to Liberty and then had a decent career in the NFL. He stuck around for a while, if you recall. Isaac Bennett was a pretty good player over the course of a few years. 11, 12, he might have played 4 years at Pitt. Recruited by Todd Graham, played under Paul Christ, and was a pretty solid back. I mean, a good back. And I think I lean toward Isaac Bennett there, but I don't think you could go wrong with either one of those guys. Jennings was a big back. It'd be so hard to bring down. At wide receiver, they actually have gotten some really good 2-star wide receivers. Greg Lee was a 2-star wide receiver. Devin Street was a 2-star. O'Derek Turner was a 2-star. Derek Kinder was a 2-star, and Rafael Rujo-Lopes was a 2-star. I mean, there were more guys beyond that, but that's just some of the ones who stood out to me. I think you probably would put your best 3 would probably be Greg Lee, Devin Street, and I would say Derek Kinder. You can make a case for O'Derek Turner. You can make a case for Rafael Rujo-Lopes. I would go with Kinder, but as my starting 3, Greg Lee, Devin Street, and Derek Kinder. Tight end, Darryl Strong was a 2-star recruit, so he would be my guy there. The offensive line, there were actually some really good 2-star prospects who turned into, there were some 2-star prospects who turned into really good offensive linemen. I think, so I kind of went back and forth about some of these. The tricky part is finding 2 tackles. So Jordan Gibbs, if you recall, was I think a multi-year starter at Pitt, a decent player as a tackle. So he could be one of your starting tackles. C.J. Davis was a 2-star prospect, played pretty well at guard, and then I think the 2008 season, I think he took over for Rob Hauser and at center, so he could play there as well. But at center, I'm actually going to put Ryan Turnley, the pride of Hopewell, who became a really good center during his career at Pitt. John Simonitis, 2-star recruit. He'd be another guard for you. I had a hard time finding another tackle. I mean, there were some other decent offensive linemen. Gabe Roberts was a 2-star. Owen Drexel was a 2-star. I had to go to John Bachman, who actually, his injury was sort of held back a little bit by injuries, but he was a good player and played a decent amount at Pitt when he was healthy. And so that's probably my starting offensive line: Gibbs, Davis, Turnley, Simonitis, Bachman. And I think that's a solid little group there. Not the best offensive line you're going to put together from the last 23 seasons or whatever it's been that we're talking about, 22. But pretty good. And I think good enough to win you some games. I like the interior there. C.J. Davis and Ryan Turnley and John Simonitis. Check out the defense, though. I think if you built a defense just of 2-star recruits who signed with Pitt, you'd be pretty happy with what you end up with. There's really only one position group where I think it's sort of tough to pick, where it's tough to pick because you don't have all that many great options, but there are also a couple position groups where I don't know how you narrow it down. Defensive end. Just 2-star guys. Defensive end. Patrick Jones, Rashad Weaver, Greg Romeus, and even Joe Claremont. If you remember Joe Claremont, he's the 4th on this list just because Romeus, Jones, and Weaver were so good. But Claremont was really good. I mean, if he ended up being one of your 2 starters out of that group of 4, you'd be happy with it. I ended up, as I was sort of piecing together this starting 11, I went with Jones and Weaver because they both ended up being, All-Americans and all. But, I mean, you can't go wrong with Greg Romeus in his prime in 2009. I mean, that guy was a beast off the edge. So you're loaded at defensive end. Defensive tackle, Gus Moustakis, Rashad Duncan, Jeremiah Taleni was a 2-star recruit. Sorry, no Kalijah Cansey, no Aaron Donald, not even a Mick Williams, I don't think. I think he was a 3-star prospect. Moustakis and Duncan, though, are a perfectly good group in the middle. I think those two played as the the interior of some pretty good defensive lines at Pitt, particularly, 2007, 2008. I mean, those guys were pretty good there and pretty reliable. So if you stacked up a defensive line of, Patrick Jones, Gus Mustakish, Rashad Duncan, and Rashad Weaver, I think that's really good. You're going to have a lot of success. Linebacker is really kind of a question mark. So I sort of jotted down the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 two-star guys at linebacker who I think sort of stood out as having pretty good careers at Pitt. And you have to think about what your 3 would be from this group. SirVocea Dennis, who we mentioned. Shane Murray. Remember Shane Murray from Central Catholic? As Dave Wanstead would say, he's from Hazelwood, so we know he can hit. Tommy Campbell was a 2-star, although his Pitt career was not great. He ended up in the NFL after working at the airport for a while. Max Gruder was a 2-star. Mike Caprera was a 2-star. Tristan Roberts was a 2-star. And Quentin Reginis was a 2-star. SirVocea Dennis, I think, is an obvious one. You're going to start him. You probably would put Max Gruder as one of your outside linebackers. And then your other one, Murray was pretty athletic, a pretty athletic guy. Mike Caprera had a pretty good season in 2015, Narduzzi's first year. He was pretty good. Matt Galambos and Mike Caprera had taken a lot of heat, but they ended up playing pretty well in Narduzzi's defense. Tristan Roberts played a lot. Quentin Reginis was a pretty good player. Maybe Tommy Campbell. I don't know who your other outside linebacker would be, but it's a solid group. I don't know how they would fare against today's ACC, but it's a solid group, I think. Corners, there were really only 2 corners that stood out to me on the list, but I would absolutely start these 2 guys. Kennard Cox and Dane Jackson were both 2-star recruits, and yeah, if you walk out on the field with Kennard Cox and Dane Jackson, I'll take that all day long. I think that's a great group. And safety, there's some really good 2-star safeties. There's some productive players who were around for a long time at Pitt. Leading the charge is Jason Hendricks. And Jason Hendricks was SirVocea Dennis before SirVocea Dennis. I mean, he signed in the class, I want to say like 2009. It might have been 2008. And back then, I think we were all sort of more... he was 2009, excuse me. I think, Pitt fans tended to be a little more favorable to recruits. Anybody who committed, hey, great to have you, welcome to the family, and all this stuff. And there were still some naysayers among the group. There always are going to be. But I think on the whole, the fan reaction on the message boards was mostly positive when any kid would commit, regardless of their stars or their offers. But I mean, Jason Hendricks was a 2-star guy. His offer sheet was Pitt, Central Michigan, Eastern Michigan, James Madison, Syracuse, and Temple. And that was it. It's a little better than SirVocea Dennis's scholarship list, but still not going to blow anybody away. You're not beating a bunch of SEC programs for that. At least you beat one Power 5 level program. I mean, it was Big East at the time, and though I guess, Temple and but I don't think Temple was in the Big East at that point, 2009, but Syracuse certainly was. So, at least a 1 win over a conference opponent. But Jason Hendricks ended up being really good. All Big East, all ACC, played in that transition, racked up a ton of tackles, was one of the more productive safeties, and just kind of was low-key one of the better players for Pitt's defenses from 2009 through like 2012 or 13, however long he ended up playing. Jason Hendricks absolutely is the standout among the 2-star safety prospects. Then you have guys like Teresh Webb, Andrew Taglianetti, Dennis Briggs, Sam Bryant. You could pick one out of that group. Teresh Webb actually started for a couple years, so maybe he would be my starter next to Jason Hendricks. You got to love Andrew Taglianetti. Dennis Briggs was a bit of a fan whipping boy. Sam Bryant played a lot as a starting safety around 2004, 2005, maybe 2006 it was. He played a decent amount. No, not a decent amount. He played full seasons, multiple seasons as a starting safety. So you could go with any of those guys. And then specialists, and it's not fair to include specialists because if they get ranked, they're all 2-stars. They don't really give any 3 or 4-star rankings to specialists. But I mean, Chris Blewett and Ben Sauls were both 2-star prospects. Ryan Winslow and Josh Cummings were both 2-star prospects. I mean, Winslow is the punter out of that group, so you take him. And then, take your pick, Blewett, Cummings, Sauls. I would guess it's either Blewett or Sauls. And, Sauls finished last year playing as well as anyone on the roster at his given position. So maybe Sauls would be the guy. But, line this up and admittedly, the offensive side has a real mid-2000s feel to it, which isn't necessarily a good thing. I mean, you're running out there with Greg Lee, Devin Street, and Derek Kinder. That feels like the kind of thing you would see in 2008, even though Street was a year or two later, I think. That has a real 2006, 2008 feel to it, which isn't necessarily a strong endorsement. Speaking of strong, I mean, you got Darryl Strong out there, who I think was a lot of unrealized potential. Offensive line has some question marks, although, I think they're really solid up the middle with C.J. Davis and Ryan Turnley and John Simonitis. And then Luke Getsy, I mean, he was stuck in a quarterback battle that he rightfully didn't think he could win with Tyler Palko, so he ended up taking off. And I think Isaac Bennett is a pretty solid running back. I think if we go 11 versus 11 here, this offense versus this defense of 2-star recruits, I think the advantage goes to the defense. I think they dominate up front with Weaver and Jones and Moustakis and Duncan, plus Romius and Claremont backing up at end, and Jeremiah Taleni backing up at tackle. I think they dominate up front. I think they're really strong in the secondary with Kennard Cox and Dane Jackson at corner, and Jason Hendricks and Terrence Webb at safety. And then I think you could get a pretty good linebacker crew out there. Servassier Dennis sort of running things. And even, I was kind of thinking of this with Servassier Dennis in the middle, but the reality is Max Gruder could play middle linebacker. Quentin Virginis could play middle linebacker. Servassier Dennis could play outside. And then you could probably go, Dennis at, let's say it's Pitt's defense right now with the, or anybody's defense with the kind of a wide side, field side linebacker, strong side linebacker, or weak, I guess. But a wide side of the field linebacker like they use right now, that Servassier Dennis could play that role. Virginis would probably be a good money linebacker, a short side, boundary side of the field linebacker. And then Max Gruder in the middle. And I'll take that group. I think that'd be pretty solid. I think Max Gruder was another whipping boy for fans who maybe gave him a harder time than he deserved. But I would take that trio, I think. If you went Dennis, Gruder, Virginis, I think you could play some games with that group. I think you could win some games with that group. All of this is to say that they've gotten some good players out of the 2-star ranks over the years. Now, like I said, I mean, we're piecing together 11 on 11, plus a couple extras at spots like defensive end. So we're talking about maybe 25 guys out of 112. And there are far more 2-star players who didn't end up being all conference contributors and big time playmakers and that kind of thing, 5th round draft picks or whatever it is. There are far more of them than there are guys like these who turned into studs. And so I don't want to present this as, see, you got to trust that those 2-stars are going to be great. But it is interesting, I think, to look back over the last 20 years or so of 2-star recruits and find out you can put together a pretty solid team. I think 11 on each side, maybe a little better on defense than offense, but pretty solid team overall. So a little bit of a distraction, something for you to think about today when you get into the office and you talk to other Pitt fans. Say, hey, I was thinking about 2-stars. What did you think about, do you remember this guy? Do you remember that guy? Do you remember Jason Hendricks? Do you remember Rashad Duncan? You remember John Simonitis? You should remember John Simonitis. I mean, he was really good at Pitt. You remember Rashad Jennings? Something a little different for you to think about today. We've got our Morning Pitt mailbag tomorrow, of course. So if you're on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, go put your question in the mailbag thread. And we'll read as many as we can and answer as many as we can on the mailbag tomorrow. But that's all we have for today. So hopefully there'll be no realignment news or anything like that for us to discuss tomorrow. We can just dig right into the mailbag and enjoy it. So thanks for tuning in today. I appreciate it. I hope you've had a great week so far. We're past the midway point. Today's Thursday. Pretty soon, before you know it, it's going to be Friday. So enjoy your Thursday. Have a great one. And we will talk to you tomorrow morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.